All right. I'm really glad I never wrote my bucket list because if I ever went back and looked at that list and saw that I wrote down seeing Jeffrey Tambor give a rim job to a beloved Dr. Seuss character who happens to be a dog, I'd have to wonder what was going through my head when I wrote that.
You're the, 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 the.
The Grinch!
Jim Carrey is the Grinch.
Okay, now before you get all up in arms as to why I'm talking about this version of the Grinch when there was another one that came out just recently, see, here's the thing. You ask anybody about that one that just came out, and the consensus tends to be eh? But you ask anybody about this film adaptation, and the opinions people have towards it tend to go from, oh, it's a bastardization of Dr. Seuss, to people who actually consider this to be a staple of their holiday viewing. And that's just fascinating to me. Every time this film comes up in conversation, everyone has their own specific opinion about it. There never seems to be any kind of overwhelming majority as to whether or not this was a great film or whether or not it was a terrible film. And that is something I kind of want to talk about. Around the time this was made, there was no other film that was going to this scale, particularly when it came to adapting a children's book that's only yay thin, that prior to which had been adapted into, at best, a 30-minute animated short, which was word for word with the book. It also doesn't help that the original animated short is still widely considered to be one of the great Christmas classics, and it's totally understandable to see why. It is a great short. The animation's top-notch, and you even have Boris Karloff doing the narration on it. Big win. But this film actually tries to go bigger with the idea and take it to a level that's far more ambitious. And really, you can see that ambition on the screen because it is creating a full-blown world that leaps off the page. And it's not just a world of people, in this over-the-top cartoony world. The people themselves are turned into living cartoons in their own right. And all of that is achieved through exceptional makeup, solid production design, and all of it in aid of trying to bring this beloved book to life. Of course, the first major thing I'm gonna praise about it is the technical achievement. The ambition of it definitely has to be applauded. And if there's anything I've ever said about Ron Howard, for all the films I've ever seen of his, even a lot of his more mediocre fare like the Dan Brown films, you never get the vibe that he's ever sleepwalking through any movie he ever makes. You always feel like he loves making movies and he always tries to set out to make the best film possible given whatever circumstances he's dealt, as evidenced by Solo. I enjoyed the film, but for a lot of people, they can definitely understand why the film may not have turned out that great given what happened during production. Either way, Ron Howard always seems to endeavor to try to make a good film. And if there's any place where that's evident, it's in the size and the scale and the detail work and the production design. The sets look great. The costumes look fantastic. And of course, let's talk about the real centerpiece of the film, the makeup work by Rick Baker, especially the makeup work he did on The Grinch. This is one of those times where the marriage of the actor with the makeup is essential. And a lot of people never really stop to think about that, and that is kind of a disservice, because when you look at the long history of actors who have to churn out a really great performance under layers upon layers of makeup and prosthetics, it is not an easy task, and I don't think a lot of people really appreciate how much hard work goes into it. And Jim Carrey had a load of trials all his own in order to bring the Grinch to life. In fact, the craziest thing he had to go through was that in order to wear the headpiece that he has to wear as the Grinch, it was actually compressing his head to the point where he actually really had a hard time even hearing through that thing. There was even talk on set that Jim Carrey actually had to consult with people from the military in order to learn how to cope with having his head compressed as it was, because he was actually having freakouts on account of the claustrophobia he was feeling from wearing that head. And Jim Carrey really needs to be applauded for having to churn out a performance that people would want to see of Jim Carrey as the Grinch. Because when you watch him on screen, you never get the vibe at all that he is having these kinds of problems. You see him on screen, and many times you even suspect that he's doing a lot of improv. The fact that he's under that level of mental and physical strain in order to churn out a performance that people would want to see of him in this role, it's something to be applauded. And he did get applauded to the point where many people forget this, but he actually did get a Golden Globe nomination for this performance. So if there's anything wrong with this movie, it is not Jim Carrey. The Who's, on the other hand,
Do it for me, Stu.
that's kind of a slippery slope, because I do know a lot of people who tend to get nightmares off the Who's. I know people who walk around Grinchmas and actually try to do this to the Who's as they see them, because they do the makeup to emulate the Who's from this movie. My take on it was, this is another world. This is not meant to be Earth. They aren't humans, they're the Who's. They're human. Oh dear God. After you're done watching this video, like, share, subscribe, come to my house and kill me, because that was atrocious. And compared to, say, Thing 1 and Thing 2 from The Cat in the Hat, this is something I can handle a lot better, particularly because the rest of the ensemble cast are a lot of actors who actually blend pretty well with the makeup. In particular, Jeffrey Tambor, Christine Baranski, and even Clint Howard himself. I did find it amusing, though, that little Cindy Lou Who looked relatively normal, but it said that she grows into her Who Knows, which I'm sure she's just looking forward to that when she grows up. But then again, from her standpoint, it's probably a lot like the Twilight Zone Eye of the Beholder type scenario, where it's just something that they learn to live with and they don't really question it. But nevertheless, the fact that this is an entire population of people that all have to have these similar physical characteristics, but even then still have to be distinctive based on the actor playing them, that they were able to accomplish this on this scale is still something to be admired. If there's any con that people can definitely pin on this movie, a lot of that could definitely be attributed to whether or not the film pulls off the intent of the original story. For anyone who's read the original book or seen the animated film, they know that the moral of the story is that Christmas is not about the materialism, that it's about something more. It's about the unity that we are meant to share as fellow human beings. Unfortunately, the challenge of adapting a film out of a children's book is, well, sometimes you gotta add a lot of elements to it. It's kind of like taking a jigsaw puzzle, which is only 100 pieces, dicing up the pieces to make, like, say, 1,000 pieces. You're gonna make the same picture, but in order to do so, you gotta go through a lot more trials in order to achieve that intention. The movie does try to add some elements in order to try to enrich the story, to try and give people a greater understanding of it. But it can be debated whether or not this is just padding for the sake of bringing it out to a feature length. Again, this is something that when I've talked to people, some people really like those elements that they add, and there are people who just don't. Now, the original book says that no one really knows why the Grinch really liked it, short of his heart shrinking or that his shoes are on too tight. As much as I'm for less is more, if you're going to do a feature-length film, take the opportunity to try and, make something out of it. Try to actually give us some insight. And I remember the first time watching the film and seeing him treated the way he is as a little kid, and my heart did go out to him, because it is always hard to be that one kid who's kind of born under a bad sign and who is immediately ousted by the rest of his own age group. And it is actually kind of tragic that the Grinch actually tries to go out of his way to enjoy it like the rest of the people, only to have it just thrown back into his face is hard. For myself, I really sympathize with that, and I got the core of the character, and it did actually lend a lot more to why it was not going to be as easy as the book made it out to be of the Grinch falling in love with Christmas, that he actually did have some hurdles he had to work through in order to get to that point. So I dug that particular little add-on. Now, I definitely enjoyed a lot of Jim Carrey's comedic efforts in this film, particularly a lot of stuff that he probably improvised.
Come on! Is that all you got? Is that all you got?
That being said, a lot of the humor actually does tend to derail the film at very important moments. A good example is in that last moment when the Grinch finally has his revelation as to the true meaning of Christmas. The film is riding high. It's doing a really good job where you're seeing this bright, beautiful sunset shine in his face for the first time, and he's looking at it, coming to this revelation, and so far, Carrey is knocking it out of the park, and then all of a sudden he's... And then he's sitting there staring at the sun and crying. And I didn't time it, but I'm pretty sure it's somewhere in the ballpark of maybe like 20, maybe 30 seconds, maybe even more. And automatically it's just made awkward. And there's a lot of other scenes that kind of follow suit, whether it be because of the Grinch motorboating Christine Baranski's boobs, or the aforementioned rimming that poor Max receives. It's little things like that that tend to make you question whether or not the filmmakers' hearts are in the right place. A lot of naysayers tend to enjoy pointing out the hypocrisy of this film, especially the whole thing where it's trying to say that Christmas doesn't come from a store, and yet when this movie came out, it was merchandised to the hilt. This is something of a he who was without sin cast the first stone situation, because last I checked, a publisher buys a book for the full intention of having it sell and have it be sold in the boatloads so they can make money. And the people who buy the book with the intention to give as a gift to another person, that is all about merchandising. And I'm pretty sure when the book and the original animated film came out, The Grinch was still merchandised. So let's not talk about intentions here. I'm sure that everyone concerned published the book and released every single iteration with the express intent to profit. Now, this is not trying to absolve the film of its sins relating to its hypocrisies, but my point is that yes, initially when a film comes out, the publishers and the studios are going to market it as much as possible in order to ensure that they develop some kind of profit. But what matters is what we're left with as time goes on. And the fact that we still talk about the book, the animated film, and even to the fact that we still talk about this film to this very day, definitely is a clear indication that there is definitely something about these iterations that definitely stays with us. The fact that even I myself still want to talk about this film, and the fact that I still want to post a review of it, in lieu of the fact that the film is getting on to, as I record this, getting near 20 years old, even in lieu of the fact that another film had come out since, and how well that one stays is, again, time will tell. I suppose the big takeaway we can have from this is what the story means to us on a singular level, and how, based on our own sensibilities, how we would prefer the story told to us. For a lot of people, they actually enjoy the way the story was told in this film, and there's a lot of people who don't. This is one of those rare times where it is subjective, where you really can't slave it to the mass consensus, because you're going to have a lot of people who feel the way they feel about this one based on their own exposure to the original source. And I guess, as far as my take on it, is I find this one just as entertaining, and I find a lot of the stuff they added to make this into a feature film enjoyable. And yeah, there's a lot of things in this film I find kind of awkward, but a lot of things I really enjoy about this film kind of outweigh it. So I suppose the end of it all is what you yourself, as the viewer, feel about it. So I'm not really going to ask whether or not you agree or disagree. I'm not even going to bother with my rating system, because I know a lot of people have their feelings towards it, and I suppose the core of why they feel the way they feel is because of how the original source made them feel as far as Christmas was concerned. Because I know for a lot of people, How the Grinch Stole Christmas really did help them understand what Christmas was supposed to be. And whether or not you feel that the message was conveyed perfectly in this particular iteration, it all comes down to you. So for more festive content on Narcotic Casserole, simply like, share, subscribe, click, thou shalt be served.
You're a mean one, Mr. Grinch. You really are a heel.